We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello listeners, this is Paula Schaffner with episode 69, Reflections and Regrets. This first aired on May 14th, 1981. The IMDb synopsis is, on Mr. Bickley's 50th birthday, Mindy refuses to share her regret with everyone else as it's too personal. This was the 56th and last episode directed by Howard Storm. It was the last Mork Mindy episode by Tom Tunowich and Ed Sharlock, and it marks the last appearances for Jay Thomas, Gina Hecht, Jim Stahl, and Bebo. However, we will see Chrissy Wilczek, Tom Poston, Robert Donner, and of course Conrad Janis in season 4. IMDb says that this is the last appearance of Stephanie Cayano and Amy Tunowich, but I think that they're uncredited in the wedding episode. Can't confirm that at this moment because I don't want to watch that episode yet, but I'll give you an update when we get there. And the reason why I mention all these last times and nearly last times is because this episode has a feel of being not only the wrap-up of season 3, but in some ways the wrap-up of the series, except that yes, we got season 4, and I'll talk about that later. It's also an unusual episode in that it's set entirely in Mork and Mindy's apartment, and there are only 2 very long scenes. There's no tag. There are balloons and streamers up all over. There's a big sign that says, "Happy birthday!" Mr. Bickley! I don't know if this means he's a tourist. The exteriors are from nighttime, didn't seem to be any snow, and I have no idea if there were any flowers. It just has the feel of being the last episode to take place that season, although there is an error that I'll talk about when we get there. Mindy is in a long, flowing brown peasant-style dress. She's ladling out some dark yellow punch. Remo's carrying 2 cups of punch. He has a dark brown jacket, a medium brown collared shirt, and light tan slacks. Jeannie looks very much like a 1981 yuppie, sort of like a young lawyer. She's got a gray jacket, a matching skirt, and a matching floppy bow with a white blouse. As Remo hands Jeannie her punch, Mindy says, "Okay, attention everybody." She walks by Nelson and Glenda, who are standing by the bar stools. Nelson is in a white collared shirt, a dark tie, a gray sweater vest, and darker gray slacks. Glenda is in an outfit I think we've seen before. It's a blue pantsuit with a purple sash around her waist. Nelson and Glenda already have their punch. Mindy crosses over to the couch and proposes a toast to Mr. Bickley on his birthday. Mr. Bickley is sitting on the couch in a dark blue sweater, a light blue colored shirt, and a tie that's maybe rust colored. His slacks are dark gray. Fred looks similar but more Fred style, so a little more formal. He's got a blue jacket, a white shirt, a red tie, and gray slacks. He rises from the couch, and they all sip the toast. Mr. Bickley thanks them. Mork enters to applause, including cheers. He's accompanied by Lola and Stephanie. He's wearing what looks like an orange traffic cone turned into a party hat, along with his dark jacket, dark slacks, white collared shirt, red tie, and of course suspenders. Lola and Stephanie are wearing regular party hats. Lola has a blue sweater, a yellow top, and jeans. Stephanie looks like she's wearing gray sweats over a light blue t-shirt. Stephanie grabs a banana from the fruit bowl. Mork clears his throat and wishes happy Bic Day birth. Mork says, "My colleagues and moi have created the world's first Morkogram," so of course referring to himself as moi and calling the daycare kids his colleagues. They'll be utilizing the letters of Mr. Bickley's name. And although we do get a mention much later of Bickley's first name, this is actually apparently just his last name. Mork clears his throat, asks the girls if they're ready, and plays an off-key note with either a pitch pipe or a harmonica.
B is for the buddy that you've always been to me.
I is for the illusions you shattered, like when you told me the Easter Bunny has rabies. C is for cake. When do we eat?
Why isn't this working out like I planned? All right, Morkettes, plan B. Dun 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 dun. Happy 50th Big Year!
So this is very in character for the three of them, with Mork celebrating his friendship with Mr. Bickley, Lola talking about Mr. Bickley shattering her illusions, because even though in some ways she's this very grown-up intellectual, apparently she still believes in the Easter Bunny, and Mr. Bickley is a cynic. And of course, food-loving Stephanie wants the cake. As the synopsis says, this is Mr. Bickley's 50th birthday. I can't remember if we've had a reference to his age before, but I always figured that he and Fred were about 50 years old. Mindy says that's terrific, and she asks the Morkettes if they would like a piece of cake. And of course, Stephanie already said she wanted one. Lola says no thanks. The moment was enough for her. Stephanie, for some reason, doesn't comment, either to disagree with her or complain, and I wondered if maybe there was a messed up line or an edit or something. As Mork leads them to the door and promises to bring the little munchkins, so of course, as always calling them munchkins, some cake at the daycare center tomorrow, so mention the daycare. I noticed that Stephanie grabs an apple from the fruit bowl, so she's leaving with both an apple and a banana, even though she didn't get cake, so at least these are healthy snacks. She uses the banana kind of like a wagging finger as she tells Mork, "You'd better, Buster, or I'll just forget the fact I'm a lady." Wrong emphasis, it should be, or I forget I'm a lady. She's a child actress, not real experienced. It's still cute. The girls exit and the adults are amused. And that's the last we see of the daycare kids, but I thought it was nice that they were able to incorporate Stephanie and Lola in this way. If this had been the last episode, this would have been a nice farewell for them. Mr. Bickley stands and says that was really sweet of those little girls. He thanks Mork, but he says he didn't have the heart to tell them that he's only 49. Mindy says, 49? Wait a minute, we called your son Tom and he said you were 50. So I liked that there is, in this episode, a sense of the show's history, and the audience has already met Tom and knows that he's had this strained relationship with Mr. Bickley, but they're presumably on good terms now. Mork and Mindy became good enough friends with Tom that they know his phone number. I just always figured he was on the road. Mr. Bickley says that Tom confused him with Paul Newman, and he says something about Paul being much older. Paul Newman was actually 56 at that time, but Tom Poston was 59. The others laugh and scoff indistinctly, and there's a lot of what the subtitles call indistinct comments with more than one person talking in the scenes. It gives it a more realistic feel. Not every line has to be heard, just like in real life. Mr. Bickley says he'll show them his driver's license. Everyone except Fred gathers around. Mr. Bickley takes out the license, he looks at it, and he says, "Oh my God, I am 50. There's a cut to Fred on the couch, who says, "Well, welcome to the half-century club." I guess Fred is a few months or maybe a year older than Mr. Bickley. Comrade Janice at this time was 53. And it seems like Fred has made peace with his age, even though he's married an older woman. So I think that he and Kathy have talked through that, not just on screen, but probably off. Fred stands and says, "So we're 50, so what? At 50, their lives are just beginning." He sits on one of the dining room chairs that are in a line, because the furniture's all been moved around. And I noticed that that's one thing about this episode, is that even though it's in one setting, Howard Storm keeps things flowing and people moving around the room, so it's not static. Jeannie says if Mr. Bickley was a tortoise, he'd be just a baby. Nelson says if Mr. Bickley was an elephant, he'd be a teenager. Mork says if Mr. Bickley was a dog, he'd be dead. And everybody's amused by this. As Mork takes off his jacket, Mr. Bickley sits and says he feels like he lost a whole year. And it's a little bit weird that he doesn't know his own age, but I guess it's possible. And he can't get over that he's 50. There are things that he's never done. Jeannie sits next to Mr. Bickley. Nelson and Glenda are sitting on bar stools by this point. Mindy asks what kind of things. He says, you know, stuff you put off. He never read the entire Bible. And that surprised me because Mr. Bickley never struck me as that religious. And he's never seen the Grand Canyon or Niagara Falls. It looks like the Grand Canyon is about 11 hours drive from Boulder, so I guess that's possible too, but it wouldn't be that difficult for him to get there, especially by plane.
You know what really gets me? I never told my son the facts of life.
How old is he?
27.
Well, he's probably still up. Why don't you give him a call?
I'll bet he's with some girl, wondering what to do.
Nobody ever had to tell me the facts of life. Guys know, right, Mork? Hey, you!
I just tried to find Tom's age, and all I could find in my notes was that it had been 12 years since he'd seen Mr. Bickley, and that was over a year ago. So I guess that would make him 25 or 26 at the time we met him, which I guess is possible, but him being 27 now was a little bit older than what I was picturing. Mr. Bickley stands and says, let's face it, he's an old man. There's so many things he should have done and didn't do. Opportunity raced by and left him sniffing its exhaust. He's now sitting in the empty easy chair that Jeannie was in earlier, next to Remo. Mindy tells him not to be so hard on himself. She says, regrets have nothing to do with age. We all have them. Things we didn't do, things we should have done. Mork stands and goes over to the kitchen counter. He says, oh, regrets. I've had a few, but I've handled them my way. That's, of course, a reference to the song My Way that was popularized by Frank Sinatra. Mindy is now in the kitchen. Glinda laughs and asks what Mork could possibly have to regret. She calls him, you little pixie pants. Another annoying nickname from her for Mork, but I will say right now, she definitely did not annoy me as much in this episode as usual. He says, ooh, bless you, like he likes the nickname. He sits on the bar stool next to hers as Mindy putters around in the kitchen, I think maybe taking out the cake. His regrets are that his foot doesn't have a thumb and his ears don't spin in the wind. Mindy probably knows that these may be things that creatures on other planets can do. Mork may have seen this. Everyone else, of course, just thinks Mork is weird. Mork also regrets that he never found out who Rula Lenska was, and that makes it the second Rula Lenska reference on the show. There's laughter and applause. Glinda thinks it might be really interesting tonight if they all shared their regrets with everybody else. It'll help Mr. Bickley, and they'll all get to know each other a lot better. And she says, oh, please say yes. To Glinda, this might seem like a good idea. This could have gone really, really badly. There's a Laverne and Shirley episode that had aired 3 months earlier called To Tell the Truth, where Laverne, Shirley, and their friends basically play a version of Truth or Dare without the dares, and it causes a lot of drama and unhappiness. They do learn things about each other, and I guess in a sense it's a bonding experience, but it's very negative. This doesn't go in that way. There is some minor tension, but mostly it's a positive thing, which maybe says something about Mork and Mindy and their friends versus Laverne and Shirley and their friends. And no, I don't know offhand if there's a Happy Days equivalent. Mr. Bickley is for anything that will help poor old Mr. Bickley, as he refers to himself. Nelson suggests Mindy go first since it's her apartment. Mork says kind of to himself that it's always her apartment. He lives here too. And I think that's kind of a tweak on the fact that it is still referred to as Mindy's apartment. In fact, I do that myself sometimes. She pays the rent, but he is contributing financially, and as we saw recently, he's contributing with the housework. And yes, he does also live there. Mork says his only regret is that he doesn't have Mindy's clout. Glinda laughs. Jeannie asks Mindy what it is that she regrets most in her life. Mindy hesitates, looking uncomfortable. Then she laughs nervously and says she'd rather not go first. She's kind of shy and all. She offers to get them coffee. And of course, Mindy is not shy, but there are times when she doesn't want to talk about personal things. That's somewhat in character. As the synopsis suggests, there's more to it than just not wanting to go first. Mork says, ooh, curiosity at her strong aversion. So he's doing stage directions thing in front of all these people. Mindy goes back in the kitchen. And Jeannie says, well then, I'll go first. She laughs at herself and wonders why she said that. She says this is going to be embarrassing. She sits down on one of the dining room chairs again. Glinda tells her to go for it. Jeannie crosses her legs and clasps her hands around her own knee. She says, well, what I most regret in life has to do with a man named Tony. And I'll just say right now, Tony is a very stereotypical Italian name, like Tony Danza. For reasons that'll soon become obvious, we don't find out his last name. Remo remembers him. He was a big guy, almost 5'8". And this, of course, is supposed to be funny because Remo's not very tall. Actually, Jay Thomas was 5'8", so maybe he sees himself as a big guy. Jeannie says Tony really knew how to talk to her.
I was kind of quiet and shy, and I really didn't think very much of myself at the time. But what I saw in Tony's eyes was so much nicer than anything I'd ever seen in my own mirror. Can you imagine having somebody make you feel that special?
How long did you and this Tony go together?
2 months before I found out he was married.
Married? You mean he was cheating on you? Now, wait a second. That guy, Tony, you dated him over a year.
That's my regret.
I can't believe this. My little sister playing Dallas in the Bronx.
There's a lot to unpack here, and as with many of the other regrets, this could have been a whole episode in itself, although not necessarily a Mork Mindy. As Remo points out, it's more like Dallas in the Bronx. Jeannie, in a way, is still quiet and shy and insecure, as we saw in the episode Jeannie Loves Mork. Though I think that she, in season 3, is more confident and more together. I like the way Fred sympathetically asks how long they were together. He's not acting like a father, but he is being a sympathetic older person. She dated Tony 2 months before she found out he was married, and a year total. And it's interesting that Remo's initial reaction is just the overprotective brother. He sees Tony as cheating on Jeannie before it sinks in that Tony was committing adultery. This definitely gives us a different view of Jeannie because she has had bad luck with dating. She's dated some bums recently. We find out that she had this affair, and that is her biggest regret. But it's not presented in a way that it's slut-shaming, so I thought that was interesting. Glenda laughs at the Dallas in the Bronx reference, and of course Dallas was a very popular nighttime soap at the time. Glenda asks Mindy if she'd like to go next, so Mindy's friends are really pushing her to share her regrets. I think there are a few different reasons for this. One is that she is arguably the person that everyone in the room is closest to, with the exception of Remo. I'd say Remo is closer to, obviously, Jeannie, and then Mork more than Mindy. But he's curious too. And that's another thing, is that Mindy seems to be a mostly upbeat person. She seems to have her life together and doesn't seem like somebody who would have deep regrets. I mean, we certainly can't picture her having a year-long affair or some of the other things that people will confess to. Also, just as we learned in the gossip episode, people want the dirt on each other, especially if it's people they know. And yes, not all of these regrets are soap opera-ish. Mindy is now sitting next to Fred. She hesitantly says she'd rather not. She says that Nelson is dying to go next, so she's throwing her cousin under the bus. Nelson says he is, referring to himself in the third person, which seems to happen a lot on this episode, people referring to themselves in the third person. She says, yeah, Mork bets that the only thing Nelson regrets is his little pink eyes can't stand this much light. So, the first of a couple albino jokes in this episode. Nelson looks irritably over at Mork. Nelson says actually his biggest regret is that Glenda stiff-armed him at the drive-in last night. So yes, Glosson is a thing. All the uncertainty of this season, it is confirmed. They went to the drive-in, which hypothetically might not have been a date, but pretty much has to be. Mindy says, ooh, getting the dirt on Nelson and Glenda. Glenda says she told Nelson that's not where the popcorn dropped. So, like, he was grabbing her at the drive-in. The others laugh and say, ooh. Mork goes over to Nelson and tells him there must be something in that albino soul of his. So it's not just that he sees Nelson as very blonde, but Nelson's very soul is very blonde. There must be something in that albino soul of his that he wants to let out of there. He tells Nelson, come on now, let it out, let it fly. And then he says, open up 3 times. Mr. Bickley leans forward and says, yeah, make us cry, which is an interesting request. He doesn't want smut. He wants something that will make them cry. We won't really get that from Nelson, but some of the other regrets might make Mr. Bickley cry. Mork is now sitting on the couch arm. Nelson says there is something that's been haunting him for years. He was 15. Again, we don't know how old Nelson was. He was hoping to be vice president, but at the same time, he's young enough to have grown up with Mindy. I would put him in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. But anyway, it's been years since he was 15. Mork quickly says, that's a good one. Who's next? Because he figures that was enough of the regret that Nelson was once 15.
And every morning I take the bus to school, the number 26 bus. One morning she gets on. She had the prettiest blonde hair I'd ever seen, besides my own. She took my breath away. I watched her as she sat down. About the same distance as Mork is sitting now.
Oh, really? Kind of like this?
Couldn't take my eyes off her. I kept staring at her, thinking, I've got to meet this person. But before I could think of how to approach her, the bus stopped and she got up to leave.
Ding!
She passed in front of me on the way to the exit.
Excuse me.
She smiled politely and got off the bus. My heart was pounding. I wanted to meet her and get to know her so bad. All I had to do was follow her off the bus and say hello. But I just sat there. The bus pulled away. I watched her through the window. I saw her grow smaller and smaller in the distance. There went my dream.
It's been suggested before that Nelson, as the blonde, admires other blondes. We get support of that here, and we saw him with a blonde at least once in season 2, and of course he's very interested in Glenda. We have Mork taking on the persona of the mystery woman as Nelson narrates, so we see Mork even some of the time when Nelson is not on screen. Mork is bringing this memory to life in a humorous way, kind of undercutting and yet also supporting the wistfulness of Nelson's regret that he didn't speak up at the time. Remo looks like he's dying from suppressed laughter, and then finally he just has to let it go. And I figured this was just Jay Thomas is sitting very close to where Robin Williams is acting this out. It's just too much. The others hold it together better. Fred asks who's going to go next. Glenda again nudges Mindy, who says she'd really like to, but she has to go get ice cream for the cake. She stands and heads back to the kitchen. Mork says he'll go warm up the ketchup, and he follows her in. So again, Mork doing weird things with food. He 3 times calls her Min, and then he says that he senses a certain aversion to airing her regrets. He asks if he's right, and then he asks if he's wrong, and then he asks why he asks another question, and then he says there he did it again. As she opens a tub of ice cream, she hesitantly says that it's very personal, and she'd really rather tell him when they're alone. He says, ooh, our sense of intimacy grows. And it's a joke, but it's also true. When we get to what her regrets are, you'll see that it's something that she could have actually said in front of her father. But I think she sees it as there's all these guests and they are going to probably all leave together, which turns out to be the case. She takes the ice cream to the kitchen table and he follows. Without any prompting, which is very in character, Glenda stands and says ever since she was a little girl, she wanted to be a dancer.
I always heard music in my head and my body just seemed to want to move to it. I started with ballet when I was about 5, and I just loved it so much. And one day my father said to me, "Where's the newspaper?" And I said, "Over there." Then I fell on my tutu. Well, after the ballet, there was tap and jazz and modern, and I just felt so free. And then Randolph came into my life. And you know, he loved to dance just as much as I did. I don't think our feet touched the ground through our entire marriage. And then I was alone. And I haven't felt like dancing since. It's not right to close off a part of you, is it?
Glenda Faye, would you dance with me?
You mean now?
Well, I've got the music in me.
Oh, no, I don't think so. No.
Sure, come on. Yeah, my dad's got a barn. Come on.
Come on. Oh, no.
Music, minstrel.
She doesn't say whether she ever danced professionally or if this was just a hobby that she loved. We learn a little bit more of Randolph, that he loved to dance too, and that was something that they shared. We return to the thing from earlier in the season that she is still working through her grief over losing her husband. She's also wondering if the grief has cut her off from a part of herself. Mork very sweetly offers to dance with her, but there's also some humor with him tripping on the furniture and so on. And when everybody is encouraging her, Mork says, "My dad's got a barn," which is another callback to the "let's put on a show" motif. And they do this very nice dance together. I preferred the dance with Nirvana, but this is a nice, sweet, light dance. I believe the instrumental is the Continental. Howard Storm doing some more ambitious than usual aerial shots, so that's what I meant about the episode isn't static. This is a decent place to go to commercial. It's certainly not a cliffhanger, but we can leave the audience with this for the moment. We've seen what some of the regrets are. We know that Mindy doesn't want to discuss her regrets, and we've already had some different tones. And I think that the tonal shifts are handled well. Next time on Becoming Human.
Want to trade regrets?
It's not funny, Mr. Bickley. It's a curse I've had to live with.
Well, there is something I've lived with for quite some time. Even Mindy doesn't know about it.
Really? What is it?
I couldn't help overhearing. What's this garbage about regrets?
We're all telling each other things that we regret the most. All right, Min, you can tell me now. What was your regret? Come on now, come on, come on. What was your regret? Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on.
Okay, let me sit down. My regret is